Imagine this. You wake up one morning, scroll on social media, and see a headline saying one of the most promising young athletes in the world is gone. Not just injured, not suspended, but dead. And then, a few decades later, the same shock happens again. This time, it's not a young athlete, but one of the most iconic musicians of all time. Different eras, different drugs, but the same feeling. How could someone like that die from something like this? That's the story of Len Bias and Prince, two names that mean totally different things, but are connected by something much bigger than sports or music. They both changed how America looked at drugs, and how America judged the people who use them. Let's start with Len Bias. If you don't know who he was, think of a player with the athleticism of Michael Jordan, the power of LeBron, and the confidence of someone who knows he's that guy. In the mid-1980s, Len Bias was the future of basketball. He played for the University of Maryland and had just been drafted by the Boston Celtics, the reigning NBA champions, as the second overall pick in the 1986 draft. He was about to join Larry Bird's team, learn from the best, and maybe even lead the next generation of Celtics greatness. But then, just 2 days after he was drafted, everything changed. He went out to celebrate with some friends. They were young, excited, and feeling unstoppable. And at some point that night, Len Bias used cocaine. Not heroin, not fentanyl, not anything crazy by today's standards, but cocaine, the drug that was basically glamorized in the 1980s. And within hours, he was dead. His heart had literally stopped, and he was only 22 years old. Len Bias didn't just break hearts, it changed laws, politics, and how people saw cocaine overnight. See, the 1980s were already deep in what the government called the war on drugs. But when Len Bias died, the war got a new face. He became the example everyone used to talk about the dangers of cocaine. News outlets called him the superstar who could have had it all. Politicians used his story to show what happens when drugs touch success. President Reagan even referenced him indirectly when pushing for tougher drug laws. And just months later, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, which created the famous crack versus powder cocaine sentencing disparity. The one that punished people way more harshly for using crack, which was cheaper and more common in poorer black communities, than powder cocaine, which was used by wealthier white users. So Len Bias's death didn't just scare people, it shifted national policy. And honestly, not in a good way. It made the drug war way more focused on punishment, especially toward black Americans. His name was used to justify mass incarceration, something that wasn't really his fault, but became his legacy anyways. And yet, his story also did raise awareness about how dangerous cocaine was, especially because so many people had thought it was just a party drug. So there's this weird contradiction. His death was both a warning and a weapon. It woke people up, but it also fueled a lot of fear and prejudice. Fast forward about 30 years, different decade, different music, different drugs. Now we're talking about Prince, the symbol, the artist, the legend. If Len Bias was what could have been, Prince was what already was. Prince didn't just make music, he was music. He blended rock, funk, soul, and pop into something totally unique. He was weird and brilliant and proud of it. From Purple Rain to When Doves Cry to Kiss, his songs were cultural landmarks. But here's the thing about Prince. Behind the glitter, the heels, and the guitars, he was also dealing with pain. Years of performing, jumping, dancing, doing splits and heels, all that took a toll on his body. And like a lot of people in pain, he turned to medication to manage it. Prescription painkillers. In 2016, he was found dead in an elevator at his home in Minnesota. He'd overdosed on fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that's 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. Unlike Len Bias, Prince didn't know he was taking fentanyl. His pills were counterfeit. He thought he was taking Vicodin, but what he had was poison. Prince's death hit differently because by 2016, America was already deep in another drug crisis, the opioid epidemic. This one wasn't about the streets, it was about the medicine cabinet. Doctors had been overprescribing painkillers for years, and pharmaceutical companies were marketing them as if they were totally safe. So when Prince died, it suddenly became clear that this epidemic wasn't just about junkies or addicts, it was about everyone. Famous musicians, suburban parents, college students, veterans, anyone could get caught in it. And Prince's death put a massive spotlight on fentanyl, which was starting to show up everywhere. Not just in heroin, but in fake pills that look like regular meds. After his death, conversations about safe prescribing, drug testing, and overdose prevention started becoming more mainstream. Even some lawmakers who had been silent about the drug wars for decades began calling for treatment instead of punishment. So while Len Bias's death led to stricter laws, Prince's death led to calls for compassion. That's a big shift in how America sees drugs and the people who use them. When you look at Len Bias and Prince side by side, their stories almost feel like mirror images. Len Bias died at the beginning of his career. Prince died after a lifetime of success. Bias's death fueled fear and punishment. Prince's death fueled empathy and reform. Bias was tied to the cocaine era, fast, flashy, and 1980s energy. Prince was tied to the opioid era, quiet pain and prescription bottles. But the thing that connects them is that both were human beings, not symbols. They were talented, complex, imperfect, and their deaths reminded the world that drugs don't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, famous or unknown, confident or struggling. Addiction or even one mistake can take anyone. It's also interesting to look how race played a role in the narratives. Len Bias, a young black athlete, became the poster child for crack-era punishment. Prince, also black but an established superstar, became the face of a crisis that mostly affected white, rural America, and the reactions were completely different. When Len Bias died, people asked, how could he do that to himself? When Prince died, people asked, how could this happen to him? Same tragedy, but different empathy. That brings up a bigger question. How do stories like this shape the way we judge people? When we hear about someone dying from drugs, our first reaction often depends on who they are. A famous musician, we feel sad and compassionate. A college athlete, we might say, he had it all, why did he throw it away? A random person on the street, sometimes we don't even ask. But that's the point. These stories reveal how quickly we are able to make assumptions. Len Bias's death became a symbol of don't mess with drugs, while Prince's became a symbol of look at what the system did. Both are true in their own ways, but neither captures the whole human picture. If anything, both deaths show that addiction and overdose aren't moral failures, they're human tragedies. They show how culture, policy, and perception all mix together to decide who gets punished and who gets helped. And when we form judgments, whether it's about celebrities, athletes, or people we know, we're really deciding whose pain we think is valid. That's a heavy thought, but it's one worth sitting with. So what do we take away from all this? Len Bias showed us that no one is invincible, that one night, one decision can change everything. His death scared a nation into action, but also into punishment. Prince showed us that even icons can suffer silently, that pain, fame, and dependence can live side by side. His death awoke a nation into compassion and into questioning how we handle pain. Together, their stories trace evolution of America, of how America has dealt with drugs, from fear to empathy, from criminalization to conversation. And maybe that's the lesson. Progress often starts with heartbreak. We can't change what happened to Len Bias or Prince, but we can change how we talk about people like them. We can choose to see the full story, not just the headlines, not just the mistakes, but the humanity underneath it all. Because in the end, both of them wanted the same thing we all want, to live out their dreams, to make their mark, and to be remembered for more than the way they died. So when we hear the names Len Bias and Prince, don't just think about the war on drugs. Just think about the potential in pain, fame, and fragility, and how their stories still echo in how we talk about addiction today. Because those echoes aren't just about the past, they're about us, and how we choose to understand or judge the people around us.